Welcome to the Actually You Can podcast. I'm Miff Galloway, a performance coach passionate about supporting ambitious and high-performing women just like you who know they have untapped potential just waiting to be unleashed. If you're looking to massively up-level your performance in all areas of life, you've come to the right place. My goal on this podcast is to take you beneath the surface so you can connect with yourself on a deeper level while providing you with valuable insights and the tools necessary to navigate life's challenges and go after your goals with strength, clarity, and wisdom. If you're ready to uncover the truth which lies underneath so you can recognize your powerful feminine leadership style, pursue your goals unapologetically, and thrive in every aspect of your life, hit the follow button and get ready to explore the incredible possibilities that lie within you. Together, we'll uncover your next steps in achieving peak performance, because actually, you can. Welcome to another episode of Actually You Can. I'm your host, Miff, and today I'm joined by the incredible Eric G, who is an expert in personality-based coaching with over 20 years of experience. He's helped thousands of students, educators, and professionals unlock their potential through his innovative Youtopia 16 assessment. From founding an education company to working with giants like Disney and Hulu, Eric is here to share his understanding about how personality can help you to forge a path to success that works for you. So let's dive in. Eric, I'm super excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Hey, you're awesome, Miff. I'm stoked to be here. Let's go. Let's do it.
You nailed the brief word for word. I so appreciate you.
I got a good memory. I got the memory of an elephant now.
And I'm keen to learn more about the animals in just one moment. But first of all, I would love to learn more about your personality typing. And more specifically, how is it different from the other personality type tests that are out there? Like I'm thinking Enneagram, Myers-Briggs. How is yours different? And potentially, why is it better suited to someone than those tests that people commonly know about?
I think probably the most specific thing is I think most tests and methodologies focus on what people do and like what they're good at or what we see them do. Like, oh, this person's structured, they're organized, or this person is more extroverted or introverted. And I think it makes sense, right? Because those are the things that we see. But I'm always been more concerned with why we do the things we do. I think you can say, oh, this person is like geared more to be a writer, right? But we have lots of different writers who write for lots of different reasons. And I always say like, I like Hemingway and I like Tolstoy, but I think we can all agree that they're both very different and they wrote for very different reasons. And I think my personality typing methodology is based more on how we value things, because I think we have different core values, and those core values determine the reason why we do things. So that's why I'm always asking people to focus less on what people do and more on why they do it.
I love this approach already. And so how did you get to jump into the world of personality type testing? What started it all? I'm curious.
mainly fun stuff. I like personality typing. I'm sure you like personality typing. It's just always fun. Everyone's always like, what Harry Potter character are you? And I started off as kind of not a weird kid, but I don't think I appeared weird. I played on my high school basketball team and, did all those things. But I think inside, just like I was telling before, like some of my core value is probably a little different than a lot of the people I was around, especially if I was playing basketball or if I was doing like some activity. And I think I just started wondering like, wait, is there something wrong with me? And I found personality typing books and I started reading up on them and researching like, oh, okay, this is really cool. Like there are reasons for why I'm different than this person. And then as I started reading more and more and you start meeting different people, you start seeing like, oh, I like this system, but there are some flaws, some holes in the methodology. And then I started developing my own. And then that really got going when I started my education company, because then I had about 1,000 students a year that we could experiment on and kind of really like diagnose. And that's kind of where it went from there. And, I wrote a book and, it was published last year. Super excited about that. And that's where I am now.
Firstly, congratulations on the book launch. I've had a sneaky preview of it and it looks incredible. I'm super excited to learn more about that throughout this episode as well. And you mentioned that your approach to the personality typing is values-based, which I love. I'm curious to know, talk me through it. How does this work in terms of most personality type testings? I know it's a series of questions that ask you about your strengths and they categorize you that way. How do you do that by values? I'm curious to know.
Like I always, I have animal types. So I use animal personality types. So I mentioned that because at first I separate people into four different personality packs. So you have one here, one here, one here, one here. And those I categorize as gatherers, hunters, shamans, and smiths. Like something that you'd imagine a role that someone would have like in a medieval village, which also explains why there's more of one type than the other. There's definitely more gatherers and hunters than there are smiths and shamans. I always say you only need one or two people to build the tools. You need a lot of hunters to use the tools. And
Mm.
so from that, we can like ascertain like, if you're a gatherer, you're going to prioritize safety and security. That's like your number
Mm.
one value. And I think that is like maybe about half the population. I mean, it makes sense because when you just think about the societal values that are often pushed on us, they revolve around that, right? Like do your homework, have some structure. These are the rules. The teacher's going to have you do these things every day, and you're going to have this organized thing yearly, and you're going to grow up, go to school, get a job, have kids, raise a family, buy a house, those kinds of things, which is, I'm not ragging on those things. I'm just saying that it fits about half the population, right?
Yeah.
That's a major value. But then you have a third of the population, and I call them the hunters, and they prioritize excitement. And that's a totally different feeling than safety and security. Like they want to get thrown around, they want to go on that roller coaster, they want to feel like they're like at the edge of dying. Whereas you talk to Gather, they're like, why would I ever want to feel that way? That's like anxiety inducing, right? So
Yeah.
even there, together they make up about 85% of the population, and I think there's already an automatic conflict there. And then the smiths and the shamans are very different. They tend to be like minority types, and the shamans focus on self knowledge. They're interested in
Mm.
discovering themselves. They're also interested in helping other people discover themselves. And finally, the Smiths, they focus on information. So they love just data, cold, hard, objective information. And, maybe one of their weaknesses is they're not necessarily great at identifying with actual people. Sorry, it gets a little wonkish when I get through all the different, packs. But when you have four personality packs, within each pack are four different animal types. So, 4 times 4 makes 16. 16 different personality types. I think a lot of people who are familiar with Myers-Briggs will be like, oh, it's like Myers-Briggs. But, there are 16, but you get to them very, very differently.
Yeah. And so as you're saying this, I'm writing my little diagram. So it makes perfect sense in my head. And especially as you're going through the different characteristics of each, I'm like, oh, that's definitely this person. Or yeah, the hunter, that's my husband. He like was looking at different ways to do something that could potentially kill him. I'm like, please don't. I love this. And so
But
in
that's fun
terms of
for him. That's that.
yeah,
Don't take away his fun. Don't
yeah.
take away that.
just don't tell me about it. I'm good. But that's a very good point. It's like understanding where someone lies in a personality, acknowledging that's just a trait of who they are and not trying to change them, as you'd hope that someone allows you to be uniquely you as well, right?
Yeah, like I mean, I bet like I know you mentioned you have a baby. Like generally hunters when they grab that baby, their natural tendency is to like throw them up in the air and kind of
Yes.
like they want them to get really excited. Like they're in control, they're not going to drop them, but like maybe a gatherer might be like, "Oh, you're scaring them," and then the hunter's like, "No, this is how they got to toughen it out. They got to be scared because that's life. Life's scary, and I want them to really like take advantage of that." So it's good to like everyone has their own method of doing things, and I think when we try to like enforce our method on someone else who's different than us, I think that's never a good sign, right?
100%. And yeah, I'd love to dig into that in just a moment. And before we get there, I'd love to learn more. You mentioned that there's the 4 animals inside each of those packs. I love the terminology, by the way. Tell me more about what animals are in each of those packs.
So let's start with the gather, since there's many of them. We have the stags, the beavers, the elephants, and the bears. I have to think of this because I remember where they are. And I generally, even to get further into the wonky methodology, you can separate the gatherers and each individual pack into 2 separate groups
Yeah.
of 2 separate animals. So I always say, like, gatherers like safety and security, and they get it by either following a specific role in society, which they deem as their duty, or they get it like through family. And all gatherers are going to love both of those things, responsibility and family. But that's how you can kind of separate. So like if you had a stag or a beaver, I always say, like, if you go to a parent teacher conference and your mom or dad is a stag or beaver and you get in trouble, they are always going to side with the teacher. They will never side with you. And it's not that they don't love you. It's just that they're like, well, I love my family, but I love my duty and responsibility as a parent
Parent.
more. Yeah. And they're like, I got to make sure that my kid becomes a fine, upstanding citizen, because if they don't, that's my fault.
Yeah.
So then when those kids come home from college or school, whatever, those parents are always like, why are you back? Like, go get out of here. Like, be an adult, versus the other gatherers. gosh, they can be a bit smothering. So you always feel loved if you have an elephant or bear as a mom or dad. But especially when you get older, it might get a little annoying because they're definitely gonna be the ones you're like, oh wait, so I are you single? Okay, I got this person that you should meet. They're always like the matchmaker, and they always feel like if you're not like if you're not taken care of, if you don't have enough food, if you don't have like a romantic partner, then they have failed. So that's the gatherers in a nutshell, in a very small nutshell.
Yeah. So in the gatherers, you've essentially got the two other categories. One's that big on responsibility, value responsibility, and one's that value family.
Yeah. And and then the day they once again they like both those things, and
Yeah.
that's why I always give like choices. And I always in the book I use that as an example, the parent teacher conference, where elephants and bears, it's not that they'll always side with their kid against the teacher, but they might take it on themselves. So they might say like, yeah, it's my fault. I've been coming home late from work. It's really I haven't been able to help them as much as I should. So they might just fall on a sword for their kid versus like flat out
Yeah.
just defending them. So
Yeah. I like what you mentioned too. It's around choice. And I think that's a really good caveat to any sort of type of test. And it's my approach to them too, is I've definitely found a lot of clarity and understanding of self through these types of tests. And what I've also kept in mind is it's a framework, and I have the ability to use discernment to go, actually, I feel like leaning more into this, or flexing up and down a spectrum of a particular quality within that. I think it helps me to understand myself, but it doesn't I don't believe that any of these sorts of frameworks should feel limiting or
oh
constricting.
yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Like I'm always like, find your anchor first, only because,
Yeah.
most of society tells us we should be gatherers because most society is run by gatherers. So I'm always, especially if you're not a gatherer, I'm always like, find your anchor first because you don't
Yeah.
want to be pulled that way. And then once you find your anchor, then it's great because then you can borrow. You can borrow from gatherers because they're great
Yeah.
at finishing things. My personality is not particularly great at finishing things. So I really do have to like borrow like, well, what works for you?
Yeah.
And different, like the one that loves excitement and safety, they're really flexible, very spontaneous, but they might lack a little organization, and they could also
Yeah.
borrow from the gatherer type, among others. So as long as you know yourself, then you can kind of experiment with other types.
Yeah, I love that. And so looking at the hunters, what's the categories within that? Is that separated into two, same
Hmm.
same sort of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing, and that's why I always focus on values, though, right? Because you're not gonna,
Yeah.
it's not gonna be the same separation, right? Because
Yeah.
they don't necessarily value safety, security; they value excitement.
Yeah.
So it's really how do they get that excitement? And so you have the
Mm.
foxes and the sharks, and they love that like adrenaline rush. So they get excitement. They are like the roller coaster people. They love to feel like they're almost gonna die, but they're not, or maybe who knows.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then the butterflies and peacocks are on the other side, and they like getting excitement through consumption. Like they love like
Mm.
seeing beautiful things. Obviously, they're going to be always going to be foodies. They're going to love tasting different types of food, listening to music, going to concerts, dancing. Like so, it's kind of different, right? Like they're both
Mm.
very different in a lot of ways, but they're all going to understand that they love to have fun. You'll always get that with a hunter. They're always going to like to have fun. They might like having fun doing different things, but they're all going to have that kind of like, yeah, life's about fun. I want to experience it. Let me do it. Don't take away my freedom. That's like the number one thing for
Yeah.
them is don't take away their freedom.
Yeah, I get that vibe when I look at those animals. I'm like, they scream fun and just let me be me.
Yeah, they're born hustlers. They are hustlers, and I say that in the most complimentary term. They do
Yeah.
not mind taking chances and risks.
Yeah.
They do want to get rewarded for it, though. They're not like they are the work hard, play hard type. So they're like, hey, if I work really
Mm.
hard and I work for this
Yeah.
very concentrated amount of time, you better give me some time that I can play hard too, or
Yeah.
then they'll be upset. So
Yeah. That's awesome. And then so the shamans, what's going on there?
so the shamans, they love self-knowledge, for themselves and other people, and so their core of self-knowledge is based on, or their core of identity really is based on either like the people they surround themselves with, so that some are people oriented
Yeah.
and some are principle oriented. And obviously they're both going to like both things, but the example I often give in the book is if you have, let's say, a dolphin or a panda, and they are the people oriented people. Let's say you have a dolphin panda. Let's say it's a panda teacher, and they have this
Mm.
really cool curriculum that they're using. And then the stag principal comes in and says, "This is great. It's working, and I love it. But that's not what the district requires. We can't
Yeah.
allow it. You got to shut it down." The people oriented shamans will adjust and assimilate, so because they're pragmatic and at their heart they know
Mm.
if they get fired, they are not going to be there around the people that they love and want to help.
Yeah.
The principle oriented shamans, like the baboons and the humpback
Yeah.
whales, they will be just like, screw that. Like, I'm going to do it because I believe in this and it works. And I think it's dumb that you're telling me not to do it. And you can go ahead and fire me if you want. So obviously there are strengths and weaknesses to both things, right? Like, I think baboons and humpback whales seem really courageous, and and people look at them like, oh my god, they're so inspirational. But they could also lose their jobs and get fired, and then they can't help anyone. Whereas dolphins and pandas, they might be a little self-loathing and feel a little like they've capitulated, and it really hurts their self-esteem. But they're also way more pragmatic, and they'll generally be in positions of society that they can really help people. So you'll find them a lot in like health organizations. Obviously, mental health is a big thing. Counseling is a big thing. Education's a big thing for them. Most things with structure and people, except for the military. Generally, they're not going to be in the military, but that's something else entirely.
Yeah, who would be in the military?
Definitely gatherers. Obviously, safety and security, big priority for them, for themselves and others. And order, chain of command. And, I get into it, like, obviously, when I said, like, the stags and the beavers focus on duty. And then even there, you can separate them, right? Because they're two different personalities. And the stags are really big on chain of command. That's, like, their number one thing. So,
yeah. This is awesome.
Sorry, I'm hitting you with a lot of information. I know, and a lot of different animals. Thankfully, I'm not using super exotic ones like, I don't know, a macaw.
I'm keen to ask more about the animals in a second, but we haven't got to the Smiths yet.
Oh yeah,
we have to go to the Smiths.
Yeah, the Smiths, always forgotten. The Smiths. No, they are the people that everyone always thinks they're definitely like, are you on the spectrum? So the Smiths, they like information, right? Information above all. They're very objective. So we can split them up into the two groups or the two personality types that use information to like learn and use it to have an impact. And then there are two animal personality types that like information just because it's fun. To them, it's just like, this is fun. I like it. And so we have the killer whales and the spiders. They like information that they can use. So they tend to be in a lot of like corporations. The killer whale is definitely what I call the CEO type. And so they're definitely going to be in positions where they get information, analyze it objectively, and then enforce it and like have maximum impact with it. Versus the chimpanzees and the owls, they just think information's fun. So I have a friend who's an owl, and Einstein is often an owl. So people are like, oh, so owls are geniuses. And I'm like, oh no, Einstein is like a totally different kind of person, but he is an owl. And I have a friend who's an owl too. He's like, dude, we're not geniuses, okay? Like, we just know a lot about random stuff that interests us. We're just nerds. He's like, I know a lot about fantasy football and massage because that's what I do for a living. That doesn't make me a genius. It just means that I know a lot about those two topics. So that's a good explanation for now. Yeah, I mean, it's good for him, right? I mean,
so I feel like we've got a really good overview of the different categories in this personality type test. I'm dying to know, how did you come up with all these animals? It seems like such an eclectic bunch. You didn't go, I'm just going to go pick desert animals or rainforest animals. How did you get this range of animals?
Some are like easy, right? Because like fox is really easy. Like you tell someone, oh, that person's a fox. We all know what they are. They're sneaky, but shrewd, crafty, wily, mischievous. And like sharks are also like, I try to do it often symbolically as well. When we think of a shark, we think of them as being very like direct, straightforward. They have a straight shot to who they attack. They're narrow of focus and they're aggressive. And if you've ever met a shark, that's exactly how they are. I know my sister's a shark, and she scares people sometimes. So, that's how it goes. But you respect them for their strength, right? They're never going to be thought as being weak for sure. So I came with the animals, just a lot of them are symbolic. So obviously like a humpback whale, right? Like what is that? It's more because humpback whales are like daydreamers. They tend to float. And I just associate humpback whales floating in the water and kind of just letting the water take them where it goes. So it just came with like peacocks, another obvious one, right? So some were more obvious than others. And if it wasn't obvious, then I had to really like think archetypally what really like connects with people. So
that makes sense. And I think it's just such a fun way to approach it. And I would love to hear what has been the reception when you've taken these tests into, I guess, the traditional corporate environment where they used to like, you're a number or you're a color or something like that. How's it been received there? And what sort of results have you seen?
It really, to be honest, it depends on the person, right? Like, I did, obviously you mentioned Hulu. So I worked with a lot of teams of software engineers. A friend of mine was a product manager. Sorry, I got to by the way, I'm not really big on terminology, but she was. So she's like, no, I'm a product manager. I'm like, okay, they sound similar. And so there's a lot of Smiths, as you can imagine, in software engineering. It's very, data oriented. It's very objective. They're not always the best with people. And so their reception was actually like pretty like flat in terms of they just thought of it as information, right? They're like, okay, this is information that, and sometimes I can use it, sometimes I can't. Other personality types tend to, I won't say balk at it, but occasionally a gatherer might get upset because they're like, wait, you sure you're saying like I'm like everybody else? And they get a little upset with that. But I'm like, hey, first off, you only want to be special until you are special, and then you're going to be upset because you're like, wait, why is everyone like, why am I the weirdo? So I
Yeah.
think it's just one of those things where I always tell gatherers, you got the golden ticket, okay? You got it because half the population are like you, and just be happy with that.
Yeah.
So it really depends in terms of reception
Yeah.
on the personality type.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And from your experience and with working with larger corporate organizations, what's the biggest mistake that they make in trying to understand teams, whether it's through a personality type test or otherwise? What do you see?
I think it's focusing on visible strengths. And I mean, I
Mm.
totally know why, right? It's easy to see, introversion, extroversion is one of the biggest things that people, it's like those are the hot words, right? But I always
Yeah.
say like Jung came up with those. Carl Jung came up with that like 140 years ago, I think. I might get the dates wrong, but that's a long time. And it makes sense that he would do that because it's pretty obvious. It's like something that's really easy to see. But I always like to say introversion and extroversion, the way that we view it, only makes sense if you're talking about gatherers. Like you
Yeah.
can split them up in that way and that works. But if you're talking about other types, it doesn't because once again, it's value based. So depending on what your value is, you're going to be more extroverted if you're in a situation that really fits that value. Like my personality type, if you put me in the middle of a TED talk, I could do that, because it just fits my personality. I love advocating ideas and principles and things that I believe in. I can do TED talk in front of a bunch of people. But if you put me in like in a dance performance or like tell me to do body shots in Cabo, I probably won't do that. It's probably not my thing. So like that's a peacock. They'll do that and they won't do the TED talk because they'll be like, I don't got anything to say. Then they'll just start dancing or something. So yeah, my thing is like the extroversion, introversion, all that stuff only works for gatherers because it makes sense because Jung, when he probably researched and studied these things, he had a lot of gatherers. He saw a lot of gatherers because they make about half the population. And gatherers are the most likely to volunteer for studies because once again, they want to do their duty. They want to help the
Yeah.
public. And so they're going to have a larger percent when it comes to the sample size. So sorry, I got on a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah, I would say companies tend to focus too much on the outside versus
Yeah.
why their employees are doing the things they do because that's the way that you can help someone grow is the why. I mean, the what they do is not really going to help them grow, but why they do it, you can really like make things better for them.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that sentiment. My full-time role, I work in training and development, and one thing that I've been leaning towards more recently was doing values-based goal setting. Like,
Oh,
it's as
nice.
and so I'm a big advocate for values because it's a great understanding of not only a person but their motivations, and we've seen greater success with having values-based goals, which has been really cool. And on that note, too, then I'd love to understand in, I guess, different contexts. I mean, you worked in schools with organizations and with individuals. Where is it most valuable in having an understanding of your personality type? Or obviously there's benefits in every context, but where have you seen personality typing be most transformative to someone? In which sort of context?
I will say the most common, especially when I work with individual clients, I
Yeah.
work with a lot of young students, right? Generally between the age of, I'd say 10 and then above. Because I generally start working with kids when their parents are like, oh my God, why is my kid hating me now? And I do not want to deal with any of this. Like, and I'm like, okay, bring them over here. And I like that age, even though a lot of people don't love junior high age, but I'm fine with it. I think it's adolescence is a great time. Maybe not for their attitude, but in general, everyone is insecure in adolescence. So it's a great way to guide them. And I think what I found is, especially when I have a lot of shaman students, because
Mm.
shamans only make about 8% of the population, and
Mm.
they grow up feeling like aliens, especially if they have, like, let's say, two gatherer parents and they're around a lot of personalities that don't match them. They often feel left out. And I think when I work with those type of students, that's when I've seen the biggest difference because I can
Yeah.
let them know, hey, like I have a student who said, she told me the other day, she's like, I don't want to grow up. And I was like, I know exactly how you feel, and I know what you mean by that. And I just
Yeah.
told her, like, it's okay. It's okay. You don't have to grow up in the way that you think you need to grow
Mm.
up. You can grow up in a way that's more close to yourself. Because I'm sure, in terms of growing up, I'm sure it's like a lot of people telling her, hey, you need to be more whatever, like stop dreaming and be more realistic or realistic. and I don't want, that's not helpful to her, like I wanted her to feel like her dreams are good because that's the most likely way for her to grow and be happy.
Firstly, what an incredible gift you have given to that girl. That, I mean, man, like to have someone tell you that at such a young age that you don't have to grow up in the traditional sense. I think that's super, super powerful. That's incredible. And I hadn't even thought of using this sort of typing for adolescence, but holy cow. If everyone had something that they could ground themselves in through such a challenging time when you're trying to figure out where you belong, which crowds you think you should mix with, ones that are best suited to you, you're trying to mold yourself to fit into others. Yeah, that would be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I had it's my cousin's kid. I tell the story a lot. My cousin's kid, who's like 20, hold on, 25. So he's not a kid. I call him a kid, but I've known him obviously because I'm older. I've known him since he was a kid. He just graduated from pharmacy school, and even then, like things like that are super helpful because I asked him like, oh, like what are you going to do now that you graduate? He's like, I don't know, as long as it's something that I don't have to be in the same place all day long. And I'm like, that's exactly what pharmacists do. You should have thought of that before you did pharmacy school. And I remember when he started, I was like, ooh, that's probably not because I knew what personality he was. He was a shark. He's a hunter. And I'm like, ooh, a shark doing pharmacy, or becoming a pharmacist, maybe not so great. But I did recommend, like, why don't you try pharmaceutical sales?
Sales, yeah.
Yeah, because that's a hustle job, right? And you get to travel, you get to like meet different people. Every day is going to be different. Are you going to have to like, are you going to have a set schedule? No, but he doesn't need it because he's a hunter, right? So I do think even when you get older, it's super helpful because you can kind of, I don't want to say it's only about jobs and careers and stuff, but I do think it'll help you find a career that you're more likely to like.
Yeah, and I mean, we spend most of our lives at our jobs, so it definitely
Yeah,
helps to have one that you at
that's
least
true.
enjoy and don't hate.
Oh yeah, for
and
sure.
and you mentioned, and I love this. I saw in your bio you mentioned that our relationship with others will only be as healthy as our relationship with ourselves. What do you think that personality typing? What role do you think it has in developing our self-worth or improving our sense of self?
Oh yeah, I mean a big role, right? Because obviously, if you have a value system that's different than the values you're being told you should like, then you're gonna feel like garbage. Now, especially if you're a shaman, shamans, because once again they're minority types and they're hearing it a lot, so they're gonna feel awful and they're gonna question themselves. I always say shamans don't have a midlife crisis because their whole life is a midlife crisis because they're constantly questioning, "Am I doing the right thing? I don't know. Maybe I should be a writer instead. Maybe I
Yeah.
should do this. Maybe I should be a vet. I don't know." Like, but even like with a gatherer, I have a lot, not a lot. I have a few clients that are gatherers and they're like in their 40s. And they've come up to me and said, look, I haven't even thought about why I wanted to do the job that I've had for 20 years. And I kind of hate it now. I'm realizing I don't like it. And so gatherers have the problem of because their value system and the things that they're doing have always been kind of like valued by like whether it's a teacher, whether it's an employer, whether it's their parents, then they've never really had to think and question it. And the problem with that is you should question a lot of things you're doing, right? Because you have to question whether you really love it or not. And a lot of times they get stuck in this pathway, this very linear approach, and they do it without ever reflecting on whether it's valuable to them and that they really love it. And then they're 40 and they've realized they have a life that they no longer want and they never maybe really wanted in the first place. So I think for all personality types, it's super helpful. I was going to mention, because I've given them short shrift. The Smiths are really funny because just like shamans, they make up about 8% of the population. But unlike shamans, they really don't care whether they fit or not. They do not care about assimilating. They're just like, yeah, I'm different. And the reason why I'm different is I'm smart and you guys are idiots. So I'm going to do my thing, and you guys can do whatever you want, which is great to a certain extent, right? Because so shamans and Smiths are great pairings, whether it's romantically or as friends, because a Smith will definitely tell a shaman, hey, like you're worrying too much about what people think. You got to just do what you do because screw them, right? And then the shaman will tell the Smith, hey, you know what? Like people have feelings. Maybe you need to connect with some of these because if you don't connect with them, then you're basically going to be like a recluse out in the woods and never have any human interaction. And a Smith will say, what's wrong with that? But they'll say that, but obviously they don't really, in their subconscious, don't really mean it.
Yeah.
So
As you're describing the Smiths, you're describing to a T someone at work, and I'm like, that's 100% him, and it's fantastic. But you're right. It's like, even though they like, I don't care what anyone else thinks, everyone cares what everyone thinks. So everyone wants to feel like they belong somewhere. But yeah, I love that description. That's really, really cool. So in saying all that, you have an eclectic mix of random skill sets, some fun facts. I've read that you are a trained pianist and that you're even an amateur magician. With that in mind, what animal are you?
I am a baboon. And so I always say that because, or I want to say, everyone always complains if they don't get a cool animal. Like people get the beaver, like, why am I a beaver? Beavers are boring, you know? And so I always say like, look, I'm a baboon. Like that's not a really flattering animal. I always say baboons are known for like yelling and screaming and showing our butts to people. And by that, I mean like actual baboons, not real
No.
baboons. I've never done that before. Yeah, like I'm a baboon. Baboons are like, you know, we have a lot of interests. We're the typical jack of all trades, perhaps a master of none. I don't know. That is our one of our big weaknesses is that we don't always finish the things we start because we get really enthusiastic about like everything. So we'll get really into something and really excited, and then something else like a frisbee will come up. We're like, oh, that's really cool too. Let me follow that frisbee, and then there goes that project. So that's why it's also important to know who you are, because then I know personally that I have to work on that. Where I'm like, okay, if I start something, I got to finish at least half of the things I start, because I can't live a life where I'm only finishing 10% of what I do. So.
And so with that, when did you acquire that knowledge? Like when did you create that, I guess, description of yourself, and how has it shaped you mentioned a little bit about making sure you finish at least half the things you start, but how has that knowledge shaped your journey since?
You know, I always think of it. This is really random a reference point too. And when I was in college, and a friend of mine who's a gatherer, she's so cool. She's an elephant. Obviously, elephants love family, love friends. She's so responsible and nice. And she would always be like, "Oh, we'd always plan to watch a movie." She's also my roommate, and we're like, "Okay, we're gonna watch this movie that we rented, right?" I'm like, "Yes, let's do it. We're gonna do it." And then something would always come up, like, "Oh, you know what? Actually, I got invited to play basketball. You want to come play basketball?" And then I would just everything would come and change where we would not watch the movie for like 2 days straight. And finally, she said, "Eric, I know that's your personality and that's the way you are, and that's great. But you know, this really stresses me out. I like to have things planned and set. And could you please just appreciate that I'm like that and be conscious of that?" And I was like, you know, that's like one of the nicest things someone could say. And also, I'm like, I need to be more respectful of that, because, yeah, that's totally. So that's when I realized, oh, I got to like, I know that doesn't have to do with like finishing projects, but that does have to do with finishing things that you plan with other people, which I think is also maybe more important. And that's when I became way more conscious of like, okay, now did I start finishing things at that point? Maybe not, because I was still only like 21. But you know, as I've gone over the years of experience, I've gotten, I think, at least a little better at finishing stuff.
Yeah, it's, first step is awareness, right? Then you can decide what you
Mhm.
want to do with it, whether you start finishing things or you don't finish
Right.
things. You're like, well, at
Yeah.
least I know what I'm doing now.
Yeah. You know, in GI Joe, they used to say knowing is half the battle. You know,
Yeah.
so at least half of it's won. So.
So good. And what a beautiful way to address the differences in personalities too. That should be like a little script for people to use. So I like that. You, I'm curious to understand then, with the knowledge you have about your personality, if you were to go back to your younger self in your adolescent years, how do you think that knowledge would have changed your experience at that age? Because you mentioned at 21, you had that interaction with your roommate. So you kind of already had an understanding of the typings by then, from what I can gather. How would it have shaped the earlier years for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, people always ask me like what is like the best bit of advice I heard, and it was early. Now, did I fully grasp it and embrace it? Maybe not so. And I probably tell myself to realize that that was a great piece of advice, and it was something that my dad told me. And I don't know how old I was, but definitely younger than one might think for what my I'm going to tell you what my dad told me. And you know, I was one of those kids. Once again, I'm a baboon. Baboons are shamans. Shamans are always having like problems where they're like, oh, am I doing things right? Am I the right person? And in a sense, baboons actually we have it a little bit easier than some other types of some other shamans. But still, at the end of the day, deep down inside, we still have these conflicts of like, are we doing the right thing? And anyway, one time my dad thought I was just being a bit of a poser and worrying about what other people thought about stuff, you know. And he was just like, you know what? At the end of the day, you know, no one gives a shit. So you just got to do what you got to do, you know, because this is your life and you're the main character of your story, and everyone else is just a side character, and you vice versa are not the main character of anyone's story
Yeah.
sometimes. And so he's just, you got to do what you want to do, you know. And I think I would tell myself, hey, you know what, that was right. Have the courage to maybe do that even more than I already did.
Yeah.
That's probably what I would tell myself.
That's a great nugget. Main character energy.
Yes, have that main character energy. Don't worry what don't sag my jeans as much. You know, I used to sag my jeans in the 90s
Yeah.
and wear like I wore size 38, 36, I think, which is not even that big. Some people were in like size 42 and you know, but yeah, now that's embarrassing. No one does that. No one's wearing 90s fashion.
Well, I think some of it for women are coming back. Man, the some of the stuff I see, like the layered tops and stuff like that, it's making a comeback. It's all cyclical.
Oh, really? Like, are they wearing like the big jeans and like the?
The big belts. Just cringing just thinking about that.
Yeah, it
It's
was
so good.
not a very flattering fashion time.
Definitely. And so I would love to, we spoke about this before, but I would love for you to run me through your personality typing. And you mentioned that you have an idea of what sort of animal I am, but I'm keen to find out and where I sit on this map that I've drawn.
Okay,
You ready?
so this is my guess, and I actually kind of had this feeling, and I could be wrong, but you definitely seem like a shaman. I mean, you're very into personality typing. You are in a leadership training position that shamans, and especially this animal that I'm going to say, really go towards that path of like leadership, HR, essentially like things where they're developing people. So I will ask this one question: would you say that you were just because I'm actually between two animals? So would you say, even though one is definitely more in my eye line there, but were you a good student? How would you say you were as a student in school?
A grade student.
A grade student. Okay. Did you
Goody two
do?
shoes.
Oh, goody two shoes. Did you ever like start a club, like a recycling club, or like did you ever
No,
were you ever
no,
a lead?
God, not that good.
Oh,
I just followed the rules.
okay. I mean, I was gonna say no. You could definitely a dolphin. That's what I would say is dolphin.
Yeah.
That is my guess. And dolphins are shamans because dolphins also have a lot of bubbly, open energy, which is different than the panda. Pandas tend to be a bit, not a bit. They tend to be a lot more reserved. But they are very similar in a lot of ways. Is they're going to find themselves in organizations and in positions where they can kind of influence and help people grow. And a dolphin in a leadership position is definitely someone who's like, okay, they're not someone who's like, you guys listen to what I have to say, and we're all going to do it. Which sometimes, which is good sometimes, right? But not necessarily for growth. The dolphins are more like, okay, what do you like? What's your opinion? Okay, what's your opinion?
Yeah.
What's your opinion? And they'll pull, and then they'll give theirs at the end and try to like ideally make sure that everyone's coalescing together versus separating apart, right? So
Yeah.
that would
I
be my
like that.
guess. Yeah.
If someone's going to ask my personality type, I'm going to say dolphin and just see what the reaction is. This is great.
Do you like dolphins?
I love them. They're so
Oh, okay.
cool.
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, I mean, I use dolphin obviously because we think of dolphins as being very like big in teamwork. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
actual dolphins really work in tandem and they're very communicative. And dolphin personality types are very communicative as well. And so they are the people-oriented shamans.
And so I know you've spoken a little bit about your book already, but I'd love for you to share more. What can someone expect from your book?
Mm.
Congratulations again on the release. That's
Oh,
epic.
thank you. I break down basically the entire methodology. So the book will tell you how to type people, but always I say more importantly, they'll help you teach yourself how to type
Yeah.
yourself. And I do use a lot of pop culture references, so hopefully that makes it fun and not like totally aggravating. I use a lot of like personal references, personal stories. I do talk about a few students. I try to avoid talking about that many students, but I will use different stories so that it doesn't get totally bogged down in the theory because once again, that's my big emphasis. And I do feel like a lot of other personality typing books really focus on these theories. And I'm like, yeah, but at the end of the day, like we've all met in our lives thousands of people. Now, have we seen them in the same way that another person might have? No, but ideally, this book helps people tap into all the people experience that they've had and build up through the course of their life. And they'll start saying like, oh, I noticed that person does that. And then
Yeah.
that person does that. Oh, that's why they're doing it. Ideally, it helps them basically train their intuition. And so my goal is like so that people do that for their entire lives. Like people say,
Yeah.
"Oh, you're categorizing people." Like, no, like it's just really trying to find more and more information about people. And the cool thing is, maybe you say, "Oh, this person's a shark," and then like 2 years later, you're like, you know what? They're not a shark because I've learned more about them and I've realized that they do this for this reason and not that reason. And now they're more like a butterfly. And I think that's just cool to encourage people to constantly be learning about the people around them.
Yeah, and you touched on a really great word there, intuition. And I think being able to build that up and build an understanding of trust in self to be able to go, oh, I'm dealing with this person from what I've learned of that person here today. And with all this knowledge, this is how I can best interact with this person to get the best out of themselves and the best out of me as well. So I think there's so much power in being able to use tools like this. And I really like this fresh, fun approach to it. I think it doesn't have to be so, I don't know, numbers, big words,
Hmm.
big chunky boxes. I think this playful approach is a lot more I don't know how else to say it, but just more human, more fun.
I mean, I feel like people, it should be fun, right? We're learning about
Yeah.
people. If you're learning
Yeah.
about people, it becomes boring, then, I mean, gosh, what becomes of life, right? Like, it should be fun to meet different people and like really learn about them, not just like think. I mean, that's the funny thing too. People are always like, oh, this stuff puts people into boxes. I'm like, everybody puts people into boxes. They just do it in a very simplistic, dumb way, right? Like, people are like, oh, this person is birth order. They're the oldest child. You know how oldest children are. I'm like, no, oldest children are not always like that. They're not always, it only seems that way because 50% of older children are gatherers, and gatherers like to do their duty. So they're going to follow the rules, and they're going to go like, oh, this is what's expected of me as an older child. I will be responsible for my younger siblings. I, on the other hand, had an older sister who was a shark. And so you have a shark as an older sibling. They're not going to do that. They're going to be like, we had a lot of fun. She'd be like, hey, you want to do this? You want to do this crazy thing? And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds fun. And then we get in trouble. And then she'd be like, oh, and she'd like throw me under the bus. It's like, oh, it was Eric's idea. And I'm like, oh, thanks. And then, of course, I would fall for it again. Like the next time, I'm like, yeah, that sounds fun. Let's do it. So totally different experience than having an older child that's a gatherer.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something good there too, in terms of you might have the same animal typing as someone, but there's different elements to you that are different. Like, despite being the same animal, you're still a different person. So when I look at it, I might be a Cancer star sign, but I'm a manifestor in human design. I'm a type 4 in Enneagram. Like, I'm a combination of all these different things. So I'm not going to be this exact same as someone else as well. So would that be this, has that been your observation too? Like, you can have different variants, obviously, that you can probably have some large common themes, but you're still unique is what I'm getting at. Is people like, I don't want to be put in a bucket. I'm not like everyone else. It's like, well, no, by default of being you are unique, but there are some general themes that you're like some other people.
Yeah, I mean, you have your own life experience, right? And that's why I always say, like,
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh, what's the best one?" I'm like, "There's no best one. Like, you could
We
be
need
a
all of
really,
them.
yeah, you could be a really bad version of yourself." I always say,
Yeah.
like, people, are like, can you change your type? I'm like, people don't change. We don't change. We grow, but we can
Mm.
grow into worse versions of ourselves too. And so in the book, I actually have a funny chapter called the deviant roles, and I have a deviant role for each animal. And it's kind of
Ooh.
like if you took, because I think our weaknesses do come from our strengths and vice versa.
Yeah.
Like, for every person who's flexible and spontaneous, they also might be irresponsible and flaky.
Yeah.
Like, and it's good to understand that, so then we can understand how to work on that. But it's also, the deviant roles kind of play off that. For example, the deviant role for the dolphin is the cult leader, right? Because a lot of their strengths could lend themselves to being a very good cult leader, right? So I think in general, like when we talk about our different life experience, we have personality type over here, and we have life experience over here, and this is where we get the character. And you're either going to be a good version or a bad version based on the various things that have happened to your life, and if you have worked on being like a good person or not. And then if you are a good person, you're going to be a good version of whatever your personality type is, ideally.
This is a shout out to everyone listening. Like, if you see me starting a cult, pull me up on that shit. Just be like, hey, you're in your shadow dolphin. Stop that. I love it.
I bet you'd enjoy leading a cult, though, right? You and yourself, you'd be like, "Oh, this is the best." Like, people are listening to me about whatever I say. Yeah, yeah.
So good, so good. And so, if someone is listening to this and they're like, I feel a bit stuck, whether it's in their relationship, their work, and all that sort of stuff, what's a really actionable step that they could do in the next 24 to 48 hours to get that clarity using something like your personality typing?
I mean, this is going to sound like a shameless way to funnel people into my book, but I do have a test on my website, and I always put a disclaimer because online tests are a little shaky, right? Because they're all cookie cutter, and I wrote the book to teach people to be a test. But that being said, I think that's the best actionable you can take is go on utopiaproject.com. There's an assessment there, and it's very quick. It only takes about 5 minutes. Just answer these questions naturally. There's no tricks. But ideally, it's not. Our test is not designed to be like, are you this or that? It's not a binary test. And then find out what animal you are. And I always recommend people to read the portrait, because if it doesn't fit completely, then maybe the test was wrong. And the best, most accurate way would obviously be to buy the book. And so then you can read the whole portrait and the whole methodology and figure out exactly what you are. But that's clearly an actionable thing. It's a really quick read too. So you buy the book, it's only like 250 pages. And it's like basically me just talking about the Los Angeles Laker basketball, and like, this is it's me just randomly saying movies that I like. And so it's a quick read. So that'd be the best action goal.
Yeah. So if you're someone potentially who has balked at the idea of the traditional corporate personality type testings too, this sounds like a really great intro into that sort of world.
Yeah, it's more about like testing your own intuition, right? You're not going to get a certain thing. I've had people like say like, "Oh, because they've asked me like, what personality am I? I'm like, you're this animal. And they're like, yeah, but the test said this. I'm like, yeah, but I think you're this. Like, but the test said this. I'm like, I made the test. Why are you arguing with me? Like, go with an actual person, right? Like, go with the person who has seen you, who's like, and they're like, oh, but you don't really know. Like this person, one of my friends was like, oh, I'm an owl. And I'm like, and she's like a peacock, which is as far from an owl as possible. And I'm like, you're not an owl. And I started laughing and she got mad. And she's like, well, why would you say that? I'm like, okay, when's the last time you played chess? And she's like, I can be an owl without playing chess. I'm like, first off, I'm just going to say that you're a peacock. She's like, why would you say I'm a peacock? I'm like, because you're loud. And she's like, I'm not loud. And I was like, well, there you go. Yeah. And she's like, but I'm more than that. Yeah. And I'm like, you are more than that. Peacocks are way more than just being loud people. But I'll tell you what, loudness is the first thing that I notice. And it's pretty clear with you. So, you know, I think in general, like a lot of people want the certainty of these tests, but they should realize it's more about the intuition, like you were saying before, like understanding it deeply and then just trusting yourself.
Yeah. It's like your ego might want to be in air quotes, like the coolest animal, but in reality, like just as soon as you surrender and then accept what is, like a much more peaceful way of existing.
Every type is cool in its own way. You know, Einstein was pretty cool too, you know, but everyone wants to be the fox. Everyone thinks they're a fox. They're like, I'm James Bond. I want to be James Bond and Han Solo. And they're like the most boring, like, but which is not bad too. They're the most rigid, structured person. It's like, you cannot be James Bond.
No, that's great. And so thank you so much for your time today, Eric. I've had a lot of fun. I'm keen to learn more about what I look like as a dolphin. So thank you for giving me that bit of insight. If someone is also keen to learn more about the work that you do, where can they find you?
So, I mean, obviously I have the utopiaproject.com site, and that's where you can read articles written by people with different personalities. But if they want to find more about me, this is strange, but I have a second website, which is where more of my life coaching and projects go. And that's projectutopia.com. And it's just reversed.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I've had such a great time delving into all the different animals. I love my little mind map going here. I'm going to reference it and going to go talk to my husband afterwards and be like, I think you are I'm tossing up, but I feel like, I don't know. I'm going to have to.
What does he do? What does he do for a living?
He is in project management, but loves the variety and excitement side of things.
That's harder.
I know.
Does he? But you said he was more of like the roller coaster throw. So I mean, he's definitely a fox or a shark. And generally, if you're in management, I don't know. Does he like it? Do people like him? Do people generally like him?
Yeah.
Oh, and he's like a fox.
Yeah. I was like, not shark, but fox was where I was sort of like sitting at. I'm going to be like, you're a fox. And he'll be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
I'll say this. I know we're going long, but I'll say the reference I use in the book is a really random movie called Billy Bathgate. But in the book, or in that movie, there's two gangsters and they're firing at a target. And then one of the main gangsters trying to teach this kid who's a better shot. And so there's one gangster who's just like, bam, 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 and hitting everything at the head, but it's taking him a while. And so, of course, that's the one that the kid says. He's like, oh, he's the better shot because he's hitting. It's always where he's aiming. And then the fox comes out and he takes two guns. It's like, it just like it destroys the target. And that's a perfect example of the difference between them is sharks are super precise and they'll wait 1,000 seconds to hit one target. A fox will take 1,000 shots to hit the target. So
there we go. That's awesome. Thank you so much again. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope this was helpful. If you thought of someone while listening to this podcast, I would be so grateful if you could share this episode with them. While you're doing that, please also take a moment to leave a review on the podcast if you haven't yet already. It takes less than a minute and it means so much to me and helps this podcast to reach more people just like you. Thank you so much for that, and I'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, go out and achieve every dream you have, because actually, you can.